Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 56. This is our Intel Arc B580 recap episode. We're going to be talking more about the value, performance of this card, the positioning that Intel has gotten themselves into in terms of offering quite strong value, our pretty strong thoughts on how Intel should not cancel Arc at this point and continue producing Arc GPUs based on what they've shown here, and obviously a lot of discussion about how this compares to things that Radeon has been doing recently, is that sort of not NVIDIA option that is available at the moment. So maybe Radeon has some lessons to learn from what Intel has been doing with these Arc GPUs. So if you're interested in the B580, which it sounds like a lot of people are, this is the podcast episode for you. So let's get into it. Hey Steve, how you going? It is an Intel Arc B580 podcast, and yes. How are you feeling? Excited to talk more about the Intel's new GPU?
You say that sarcastically, like I don't want to or something. No, I'm actually pretty keen to discuss it with you, apart from the fact that my voice is a bit hoarse at the moment. Everyone's still very sick here. Balin's struggling. I'm doing okay otherwise, just my voice is a bit crappy over the last few days, but otherwise I feel pretty good. But yeah, no, B580 was interesting testing it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the review process. It was, again, good to review something that we could recommend, and probably something that was sorely needed, like an affordable GPU. So that was good.
Yes. I'm hoping that you'll be smashing the waters today to keep your voice in check. Because, yeah, things are going around here at the moment. In fact, today, as we're recording this podcast, I think it's set to be at my place like 40 degrees Celsius, which is pretty warm. Mm-hmm. So I've had to leave the aircon on. Hopefully that's not going to become too much of a problem. But, yes, very, very warm at the moment. Lots of residual sicknesses going around.
It's crazy.
But yes, yeah, the Intel Arc B580 being an actually good product that's worth recommending, it's refreshing, isn't it? Because it feels like there's been years now of most graphics card launches just being the biggest piles of crap, just crap dished on top of crap. And Intel's actually gone and done most of what they've needed to do with this product and made it at least a little bit exciting. And it feels like from the reception from the comments and stuff, like you just read people going, oh, it's good to see there's finally, affordable GPUs getting the VRAM that we wanted at this price point. Did you sort of feel that sentiment while reviewing it and reading the comments as well?
Yeah, definitely. The RX 7600 was that a $270 US product. Yep. Performance isn't amazing. It was pretty disappointing, but I guess, not being $300 US, it was a little bit under that. Sure, but then only 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and then the 4060, same sort of deal, really. So to get more VRAM, a bit better performance and all that at what should be a better price is really good. Of course, there's availability issues and all that sort of stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon, but I'm not too worried about all that sort of stuff. Again, we'll talk about that a bit later on. But yeah, it seems like a genuinely good product, and I expected it to be fairly good. I think Intel made some pretty impressive strides, great improvements with the Arc A770. I thought that got to a point where it was a very usable product. Certainly at launch, it was probably more of a headache than it was a usable product. But yeah, I think further down the track, it became really usable, and a lot of time and effort was put into it. So to see the B580 carry on from that, not terribly surprising. I didn't run into too many issues in my testing. I think I mentioned a couple of games. It was like Star Wars Outlaws was crashing regularly, but they released a new driver prior to reviews going live, which solved that entirely for me. And by the time the reviews went live and all the games we tested, they were running fine. So I plan on doing a 50-game benchmark or thereabouts, so we'll get a good sense of where the drivers are at. But yeah, I think they're in a pretty good place, and they're certainly very on it. If you report something to Intel, they seem to jump on it pretty quickly and address it. I know they've had problems with games like Halo Infinite, which I haven't looked at recently, but I've heard there's still problems there. Halo Infinite just seems like a game where Intel's just not been able to work it out. There's always something wrong with Halo Infinite and Arc GPU. So that's annoying if you're a Halo fan and you want to play that game. Probably don't get an Arc GPU. But otherwise, generally pretty good. If there's a game that you play a lot, like say it's a Call of Duty game or a Fortnite or a Halo game, I would urge you to research how well the Arc GPUs play that game before buying them, because it could be a situation where it's not very good in that particular game, but then other games, very good. And that's pretty much what I concluded in my review, right? I said you're more likely to run into problems with an Arc GPU than you are a Radeon and GeForce GPU, which is why we said originally, I don't know where we talked about this, but it's funny how it all worked out. I think you and I, we pretty much agreed that compared to the Radeon and GeForce GPUs, Intel needs to provide at least a 20% discount for it to be a thumbs up. We recommend you buy this. And they did that. So yeah, there are some concerns. There are a few minor problems in some areas which are worth being made aware of. But at the same time, you can still recommend the product because of that heavy discount. So it's basically worth putting up with a couple of potential headaches to save the money. And especially we're talking about an entry-level product here where $50 US is a big deal. If we're talking about $1,000 plus products, then you would just say, look, just get the GeForce GPU. You don't, when spending $1,000 US, you don't want things not to work exactly the way you want them to work. But yeah, at the entry level, it's definitely a good place for Intel to come in. And yeah, I think the B580 so far, so good.
I think they did what they needed to do, right? Like they weren't stupid. Like they assessed the market and they sort of went, well, this is the sort of performance, the value that we need to hit to make people actually buy this product. And they didn't do the whole Radeon thing of just being like, our products are really good and we're going to price them just a little bit less than the GeForce cards. They actually thought about it and went, hey, we acknowledge that our drivers are improving, but there's still going to be some inconsistencies with some games. We can't guarantee a good experience across every single game. So we're going to offer you this card at a discount. And it sounded like from our chat with Tom the other day, Tom Peterson from Intel, that the margins on these cards are not exactly huge. They're not making tons of money on the Arc division or on this particular product, but that's what they needed to do. This isn't a product to make tons of money. This is a product to establish a presence in the market with a GPU that people might consider buying, so that maybe 2 or 3 generations down the line, people are well aware of what Arc's offering and they can start moving up towards, actually making money from graphics cards. So the fact they've gone from the A770, A750, which at launch, they weren't the easiest cards to recommend. They certainly weren't offering this extreme value, or at least good value relative to other cards. They've basically flipped that and gone, this is what we need to do. And they've managed to achieve it. And there's a pretty good chance that if you are one of those gamers that largely sticks to one or just a few games, that you'll be able to get good performance on an Arc card, especially if you look at the specific benchmarks as you were suggesting. There is a chance that like a Call of Duty, for example, or Apex Legends or one of those games runs really well on this product, and then you'll be set because you only play a couple of games, so you don't have to worry too much about the inconsistent performance or game compatibility issues. I think the thing that Intel still needs to really prove is for those people that have really broad game libraries where they're playing a lot of day one single player games. They're constantly changing. They might play, 10 games a year or something. There's still, while a lot of the games that you tested work pretty well, I would still have a few question marks over like, is the next Starfield, when that comes out, like Starfield type title, sort of this, it's not built on a main engine that's used widely like Unreal Engine or something. It's like this unique engine. We haven't seen it used in games for a while. It's a new title. With Starfield, it took them a couple of weeks to get drivers up to a usable level. I think they're improving with that, but that's still the reason why I would say the 20% threshold is necessary for an Arc card. Because if you do play those broad number of games, you want to make sure that when a new game's out, that you can play it and have it run really well on your card. So I think there's certainly in a way better position when it comes to that than with the initial Alchemist products from a couple of years ago. Like I would have little to no issue recommending or using a B580 in this price class to people. Of course, with those caveats, you'd say like, hey, there might be a few games that may not run as well as you'd expect, but in the games that do work really well, the games that the Arc card is really good for, you're getting quite a lot of benefits. Like the performance is genuinely good in a number of games. The VRAM does give you genuine benefits because 1440p ultra type settings are often playable. And for some of those games like The Last of Us, for example, you do need more VRAM to play those games at a decent level of performance. So it's offering you a good range of things, I would have thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the VRAM thing is also for the future as well. So there's not that many games now under realistic or reasonable conditions where the entry-level cards are too much of a problem with 8 gigabytes. We've certainly seen examples of it, but I think if you're buying a B580 now, you're almost certainly going to be holding onto that card for at least the next 2 years, probably a bit longer. And 2 years from now, you're going to definitely see a lot of games where even the medium settings are causing issues, and it's just something you don't have to worry about. So you're getting that discount, that saving, while not having to worry about that annoying thing that you have to worry about with the competing Radeon and GeForce GPUs, which is the game running like crap, or is it stuttering because of VRAM or because of just the GPU power? Do I have to lower quality settings like shadows or something to improve that? Or is it a texture quality thing? And it's just something you don't really have to worry about with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. That's not going to be a problem over the next few years, especially for that class of product.
Yeah, and I think with this class of product as well, there's going to be some games where you will be able to play it at a reasonable resolution. Like there's always this discussion where people say, oh, you know, these cards don't need more than 8 gigabytes of memory because you can't run ultra settings on them anyway. They're not fast enough for that. But there are games, not that there's huge number of games, but we are seeing more games at 1080p ultra where you do require more than 8 gigabytes. And then in this GPU being a little faster than a 4060 and 6700X, so the 7600 XT or thereabouts, there is the opportunity to run some games at 1440p. So
yeah, it's not a good argument anyway, because if you are a PC enthusiast and you like to tune your settings for optimal visuals, and you're someone who talks about stuff like ray tracing and whatever, realistically, with these cards at 1440p, you could set the preset to medium and then jack the texture quality up to ultra, which will really improve the visual presentation of the game. And that's something you can do if you have enough VRAM. Whereas if you don't have enough VRAM, it's medium textures with the medium preset, not medium preset and ultra textures. And we've seen, Space Marine 2 being a recent example of how higher quality textures just significantly improve the visual presentation of the game. It's huge. So being able to max out texture quality is a big deal in a lot of these games.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And like I said, the performance probably in a lot of games is even a bit higher than medium if you're just one of those gamers that chucks up to the ultra preset straight away. Because there are gamers that don't do that optimization. They just run on ultra and are like, why is this game running so bad? Like I thought I could play 1080p ultra. They don't realize that on a class of card like a 4060, you may have to drop those VRAM setting related settings, or not use a setting like frame generation, for example, which maybe isn't the best use case on a product like this. But if you want to experiment with that, then you're pretty much going to be blowing out your VRAM budget, even at 1080p on some of these products.
Yeah, well, if you want to talk about stuff like ray tracing on an RTX 4060, that's not something where you can just load a ray tracing preset. That requires heavy compromises to be made on certain visual settings. So if you are, an owner or someone who has that class product, because we do hear from GeForce owners who say, I've got a 2070 Super or a 4060 or whatever, and I like ray tracing. Well, you're not doing that with ultra ray trace settings. So you're having to customize and change a lot of settings. And I would argue that a compromised ray traced experience on a 4060 doesn't look as good as a B580 running medium with ultra quality textures in a lot of game. Like basically what I'm trying to say is I would rather have the highest quality textures possible than a tuned ray tracing experience on this entry level class of products. Because we already know for a fact there is not a single instance where a 4060 can run, at least the games you tested, under sort of transformative conditions. It's just not possible with a 4060. You can't do it, right? Like you're not doing overdrive mode in Cyberpunk. You're not doing path tracing in Black Myth Wukong. So all the instances you pointed to that I think where you said generally looks better or is transformative is not achievable on a 4060 at 1080p using like DLSS upscaling, say quality mode or whatever.
Yeah, I think Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition is probably one of the few examples where the frame rate is quite playable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, most examples that I've seen, it exceeds the sort of performance class of that tier of product. And even with these sort of, having to optimize the settings sort of things, you're talking about largely playing at 1080p, probably with upscaling, and then with some sort of reduced settings, whether that's reducing the other preset, the non-ray trace settings, or just turning down the ray tracing. And as I've seen across all these games that I've now analyzed, when you turn down ray tracing settings, you're getting them like in a lot of games, it is quite a bit like compromised in terms of either they're just turning off all the ray tracing settings that make a difference, like reflections, or you're getting these like reduced resolution effects effectively. So like whether that's, in a game like Ghostwire Tokyo just turns down the resolution of reflections significantly. In Cyberpunk, you turn it to low, you're turning off like all the reflections and global illumination. So it's like, what's the point of using that sort of setting? And those are the types of settings that are targeted towards 4060 owners. Whereas with VRAM, you don't really need that sort of performance. But
yeah, I think it's pretty obvious at this point. I think gamers have spoken on this one, but I'm pretty confident if we poll this, what do gamers want at the $300 US price point? A sufficient VRAM buffer or the ability to use ray tracing to some sort of degree? I think they're going to go with the VRAM. The ray tracing argument, I mean, the 4060 is still it's still the superior ray tracing product, I guess, in the instances where we point to say ray tracing makes a difference. But in most of those examples, you were talking about 30 FPS or less on a 4060 anyway. So, yeah, I guess the B580 can do ray tracing, so I'm not suggesting it can't, but I just think the win here is the VRAM buffer, not the whatever it is ray tracing performance.
Yeah, and even then, like, the ray tracing performance isn't bad. Like, in those games where you're required to use ray tracing, like Star Wars Outlaws or Indiana Jones, and there's going to be more examples of that over the life of this card, I would imagine, games coming out where you are required to use ray tracing. I think Final Fantasy or one of those games was announced recently that is another game that's going to require ray tracing. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'll have to look into that. But, Star Wars Outlaws performance, the B580, when it runs and doesn't crash, is perfectly fine. So
yeah, it's fast. It's faster than the 4060.
Yeah,
and,
so
with the latest driver, it wasn't crashing for me, so that's good. I mean, that was with the Ultra preset. You'd probably want to turn it down to high or medium, but
yeah,
it's still faster than the 4060.
Yeah, these days you do need some level of ray tracing on these cards because, again, there will be those games where you're required to use ray tracing. But the fact that the B580 is generally quite a bit faster than the Radeon model in those really intense ray tracing examples bodes pretty well for, those cards, in terms of games coming out that may use it, or where, you may be able to use minimum sort of level ray tracing. It's not going to be a 4060 level of polish, but the fact that they've been able to come out and pretty significantly in some of these examples outperform like a RX 7600 XT at this price tier, that bodes well for their architecture, and especially getting more powerful battle mage cards, which may be a bit more competitive with 4070 tier. You're probably going to be considering using ray tracing in some examples. So the fact that it's more like a 7700 XT in ray tracing performance, I think is pretty good for that. But again, we're talking about largely their settings that you're probably not going to be using on this card. And I think Intel really has, they've kind of set the tone here for what a value product needs to look like in 2025. It's got adequate VRAM. The value is really strong. They're actually providing additional value price to performance ratio over existing models. They're not just remaking the same card over and over again, which is what competitors are doing. Or even NVIDIA, they make a 4060, which has less VRAM than a 3060 at a similar level of performance, even though it was a little cheaper. They're actually thinking about pushing the industry forward. So this is the bar that's been set. Like NVIDIA and AMD, if they want cards that are worth recommending in this price tier, you can't just remake the same thing again. Like there's a new entrant now, and I think that's going to be big for a lot of buyers.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think it's based on what I've seen from, pretty much all the reviewers I watched. Seems like they're going to recommend a B580 over an RTX 4060 pretty much universally, especially if those prices that we saw upon launch are met. Obviously, there's availability issues right now, so $250 US is pretty hard to get a B580 for because they're all sold out. But that's not an unusual situation, I would say. We've seen countless GPU releases in the past where the initial supply hasn't been able to meet the demand, and that's certainly the case here. And I've heard some people suggest that it's a paper launch or something along those lines. I don't believe that's the case at all. With the manufacturers and retailers and distributors that I've spoken to said the initial supply was quite substantial, and really all of them were blown away by the demand for the B580, even on pre-order. So pretty crazy. Before the review process even took place, just based on Intel's claims, a significant number of gamers they were willing to take the risk that it was faster than an RTX 4060 and buy one. And I guess that speaks to how desperate gamers have been for an affordable, entry-level GPU that has decent performance, good amount of VRAM, at a reasonable price. So yeah, again, when I spoke to people, they said definitely not a paper launch in their opinion. Good number of cards, and yeah, the takeaway was they were blown away by the demand for this Intel GPU, exceeded everyone's expectations. So that's pretty cool. Pretty good signs for Intel.
Yeah, and I guess it shows that, again, like listening to the audience, like listening to gamers and especially entry-level mainstream PC gamers to what they want, and then making that product like, oh, I'm shocked that this is the formula to make a card that people want. Like, what are the gamers saying? GPUs are too expensive. They don't have enough VRAM, and AMD and NVIDIA just rehashing the same cards over and over again. We haven't got significant advancements. So, I'm amazed that a card that doesn't do that and actually listens to those people is something that people want, even if they're willing to. And I guess they're showing that they're willing to overlook some of the flaws and potential downsides to getting an Intel card because the options available are so bad otherwise. And like, I don't want to say like a 4060 or a 7600 are really bad GPUs, because you buy them, they're perfectly fine. Like they run games, they run most games. You're not going to have too many issues with them. But if I think about mainstream GPU buying since maybe 2019-ish, like the 20 series sort of era, back then with the 20 series, if you wanted to buy a lower end card from NVIDIA, you were stuck with the models that didn't have RTX features, which at the time we were sort of saying probably wasn't relevant at that time. But today, if you'd bought like a GTX 1660, you're not going to be using DLSS or features like that. And so a lot of people were sort of wanting those higher tier cards, and the 2060 started at $350. So it's like, okay, bit of a toss up, bit of a trade off there. And AMD had, the 5700 XT, but the lower tier cards weren't amazing. And then we went straight into, in 2020, a period of GPUs being unavailable and very expensive. So if you wanted to buy a card that was reasonable, like an RTX 3060, you were stuck having to spend way more than that card was actually worth. Alternatively, there were things like the RX 6600 and 6600 XT. Again, very expensive. The MSRPs of those cards were very bad, and they sort of were priced for the inflated pricing at that time. And so we come out of that, right? Everyone's like, yay, mining isn't a thing anymore. We'll be able to get new GPUs that are really good. And then what does NVIDIA and AMD do? Well, NVIDIA slaps you with the 4060, which is basically a 3060 with less VRAM at a similar price. Doesn't really do much for the mainstream market. AMD copies that and makes a slightly worse version of it at a slightly slower price in the 7600. And they do not much else. And so we're talking about from 2019 or 2018 almost, which is like, 6 years? We're approaching 7 years from that sort of era. Gamers have been given this crap sandwich in that price tier. And maybe if we could all have bought 3060s at $330, and people would be in a much happier position about upgrading, but that didn't happen. So it's wild to me that, and we'll probably talk more about this with one of these questions, that like AMD hasn't been able to capitalize on that. This thinking that gamers in this mainstream tier have been crying out for these sort of products. you look at what people like. Sometimes you see like a mainstream gamer that isn't a hardware unboxed audience member. They're just someone that buys a PC and they spent a large chunk of money to get this like good quality gaming PC. And some of them have, they're buying like RTX 3050 systems and stuff in this price tier. And you just think like, oh, if only there was something that was better than that in this sort of affordable price range. So again, Intel has gone squarely at that market. And I think the thing that was really impressive as well was that the performance of the card, at least in your testing, did exceed what Intel was claiming. It wasn't like Intel inflated the numbers and suggested that the card was better than it actually is. The performance across most reviews is pretty in line with what Intel was suggesting. And if anything, your performance numbers seem to be a little, I guess, more favorable towards Intel cards than others, but still around that sort of 10% above 4060 seems to be pretty in line, which is good to see.
Yeah, I think if we test a massive amount of games, it'll probably come closer to that. I don't know yet because I haven't done it. But obviously, it comes down to the number of games you test and what those games are as to what the margins will be. But yeah, the B580 is going to be an interesting experiment. I can't wait to see how many of them they can produce, how many of them they sell, you know, how long this strong demand for them lasts. Because if it is successful, it just proves everything we've been saying about Radeon for years now and just how hard they failed when they didn't need to. I mean, at current prices, so the RX 7600 is about $40 US less than a 4060.
Yep.
Which makes it about 7% better value in terms of cost per frame. That's it. Whereas the B580 is like 26% better value, which is why people are snapping them up, right?
Yeah.
So the RX 7600, I mean, 8 gigs of VRAM. I can't remember what I said in my review. That really can't have been more than $250 US. Probably should have been less than that. I think $250 US should have been the 16 gigabyte version. I think had they done that, they would have made some inroads. They would have been popular cards. Gamers would have bought them. Like, we sit here saying, gamers just don't buy Radeon. I've heard this for, it's a story as old as time. Like, gamers just don't buy them. Doesn't matter what price they are. BS, it doesn't matter what price they are. If they actually release them at the prices that make sense, like, we review the product. And every time we say, this is the price that makes sense for this to sell, and it's never priced near that price.
Yeah.
They just don't do it. So if they did price their GPUs where they need to be priced based on a technical evaluation, I'm sure they would sell well. And that's what Intel has achieved here. Obviously, it'd be great if the B580 could be even cheaper. But in the current market, the way things stack up, the competition they're coming in against, they've priced it where, for an entry-level gamer, it's too hard to pass up. You can't refuse that offer. That's why they're sold out everywhere.
Yeah, I think I'll only buy NVIDIA. I'm not going to consider AMD. The only time that's even possibly true is at the high end when you're sort of talking about spending $1,000 or $1,500 or whatever. Like, I'm sure there are some games like, I just want the best of the best. So if Radeon is offering 20% less performance at a 30% price discount, they still wouldn't buy that. They would just buy the fastest card. But I think that it just isn't true for mainstream gamers. And we think back to all the times that Radeon has had really good products like the RX 480, RX 580. Those cards have been value choices where people have tossed up the sort of, the value, the overall benefits of the card and gone, this product is the product that I'm interested in for these reasons, for value reasons. And I think that while I guess today maybe some commenters are saying things like, well, people just buy GeForce because ray tracing, because DLSS and those sort of things. I think it gets to the point where there is a price that people will overlook those sorts of things. Like the 46, like if you had $200 to spend, right, NVIDIA's offering you absolutely nothing. Like there's just no GPU. Like, okay, yes, you could buy a 30, 50, 6 gigabyte or whatever, but that card is terrible. So they're offering you nothing. So if there was a genuinely fast GPU at that price tier that didn't have DLSS but had good price to performance ratio and other features gamers would want, you can't sit here telling me that people would overlook that and buy spend $100 more on a 4060 or buy a 3056 gigabyte. Categorically, they would not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I'm talking here about people that research and read reviews. There are still going to be people going into a Best Buy or here JB Hi-Fi or whatever and buying an off-the-shelf pre-built system from Dell or HP or one of their gaming brands or whatever, Omen, whatever, and ending up with a 3056 gigabyte in there because that's what OEMs put into them. They want NVIDIA, whatever. I'm not really talking about those people. I'm talking about DIY buyers doing research, part of the ecosystem, they're a PC game that loves building PCs. You cannot tell me that Radeon wouldn't sell at a lower price. That's just...
and this is what we've been saying all along. That's step one, right? Win over the PC enthusiast, step one. If you haven't won over the PC enthusiast, you're nowhere. You're not in the game. That is absolutely step one. Once you win over the PC enthusiast, then word starts to spread that these are the products you want to buy. These are what, the guys in the know are suggesting. Get that. And then eventually that happens for long enough, you end up with situations where, I speak with a lot of retailers. So you go back 5 years, you could not sell a pre-built system with an AMD Ryzen CPU. Couldn't do it. They just wouldn't sell. Intel flew off the shelves. Put an Intel, CPU in there, good to go. And then you got to about 3 years ago, and there started to be a bit of a demand for Ryzen CPUs in pre-built systems. So I'm not talking about retail sales of the product itself. I'm talking about pre-built computers. Speaking with retailers today, it's flipped from 5 years ago. Selling a pre-built system from a major retailer with an Intel CPU for gaming is really difficult to do. The demand for Ryzen's through the roof. Everyone wants AMD Ryzen. That's what the more normie... I know there's like the sort of Dell and HP, which are probably a bit different. They're probably still selling predominantly Intel. I don't actually know, but I imagine those guys take even longer to get to. But, there's steps basically that get taken in sequence. And we're now at the step where for pre-built systems, from anywhere from like boutique builders to major retailers, they're primarily selling Ryzen. So this is why the Radeon thing was always so frustrating, because they took all the steps with Ryzen, but not with Radeon. Radion's still absolutely nowhere. So Intel's taking the Ryzen steps with Arc, at least so far. That's what it seems like. And it's even had a similar story, initial release, bit rocky, got fixed up, patched up along the way, next generation, much better, and sold much better as a result. So, they're taking the necessary steps to build the Arc brand, and hopefully things continue in the Ryzen direction.
Yeah, and I think Intel would be it would be pretty silly for them to cancel Arc at this point. That's obviously been something that's hanging over their head. I think it would be a really bad decision at this point to cancel Arc. It's like, okay, right now, the Arc division, the discrete GPU division in particular, is probably not making money. It's probably on the cards. They're making a small margin on it. I don't think they're selling the GPUs at a loss, but I would be shocked if they're making NVIDIA or AMD margins on these cards. It'll be very slim.
To add to that, I've spoken to some of their partners, so the smaller, lesser known brands that are supporting them exclusively or directly, and they're over the moon about the B580, like wrapped with it, excited. So they have to be making some kind of money for them to be as excited as they are about this product. Like, they are just pumped. So there has to be some money being made, or they just wouldn't be as excited as they are.
Yeah, I'd say, I guess the question is, I'm sure the OEM partners would be making money. Whether Intel is selling the GPUs at a loss, I don't know, but I doubt it. Like I don't think that they would.
Mm-hmm. Well, normally the partners are the ones that get, at least with AMD and NVIDIA, historically they're the ones that have been squeezed the hardest. So I'm not saying that's indicative of whether or not, you know, the first party's making money, but if the first party's not making much money, the partners are having a real bad time, not happy.
Yeah.
Like not happy at all. Whereas that hasn't been the case for the Intel partners that I've spoken with.
Yeah, which is good news. And I'm sure they'd be happy with the performance and the reception of the cards too. That's almost certainly going to be playing into that. But like, it's a long-term strategy with these sorts of things. And I really hope that with the leadership changes at Intel, the new executives coming in, board changes, that sort of thing, that they don't get investor-brained by this. And by that, I mean looking purely at what's the short-term things we need to do to make stock go up, make money right now, because with GPUs and with, in fact, it's not just GPUs, it's with any of these sorts of silicon products, CPUs, GPUs, servers, whatever. It's such a long process. You're setting things in motion for that you're expecting to pay off years from now. So when it comes to foundry, like Intel's, you know, process technologies, it takes a long time to fix issues and get them into a more competitive position. With CPUs, it's going to take a while to go from the power-hungry, issue-ridden CPUs that they were making previously to being back in competition. And those design decisions and everything are made years in advance of the products coming out and stuff. So you need to invest in your products long-term with the goal of increasing market share and having this position in the future, not right now, in the future, where people will be very interested in your products, whether that's GPUs, CPUs, or whatever. So canceling a product like Arc now, when you've just taken 2 steps of a 5-6 step or more journey, would be monumentally stupid. Like and I guess there would have been justification if the B580 came out and it was even worse than the A580, A770, if they're not going in the right direction. But they seem to be going in the right direction. And yeah, okay, the die size is large. It's using a lot of transistors. It's not as effective or as efficient as their competing brands, but they're still able to produce a card that's worth recommending at a good price. And you'd be expecting that in a couple of generations, that's going to be in a better position. They can start making more money from it. It's like, this is how things go. But, you know, like investors don't get this. They're just like, Arc makes no money equals cancelled.
Not even investors, PC enthusiasts. I love when I read comments like, look how big the die size is, guys. It's not as efficient. It's like, yeah, no kidding. If it was as efficient, NVIDIA would have a very big problem on their hands if within a generation they're as efficient. What are you talking about? Then what?
Yeah, it's pretty wild there, because it's going to take a while for them. Like NVIDIA's been making GPUs and exclusively GPUs for decades. And this is Intel's second attempt at scaling up what is effectively an integrated graphics architecture into something that is suitable for desktop GPUs. It's like, yeah, there's going to be some areas that, you know, it's not as competitive in. They've got work to do to close that gap. And maybe it takes them a very long time to close the gap. But if they can make products that are well priced, attractive, they're getting the name out there, then those are the steps that they're able to take, and those are the steps that they need to take. Whereas, you know, if they made this product exactly the same but made it more expensive and didn't get any interest in their GPUs, like the GPU is what it is. Like they've made it, and the die size, the performance they can get out of it, pretty much is what it is. The things they control are things like how much margin we make from this product, how are we going to price it, how are we going to market it, where's the positioning relative to their competition, and they've taken all the right steps in that facet. So that's as much as they can do. And yeah, if an executive comes in and is like, man, this Arc division, why are we wasting money on this, would just be extremely short-sighted, because the future of desktop GPUs is only going to get more relevant, as Tom was saying in our interview in the previous podcast episode. And, you know, having a strong, discrete GPU architecture allows you to make server products and other things which are high margin, highly valuable, highly sought-after products. Why would you cancel it?
No, the real blunder is the fact that they didn't do this sooner.
Yeah.
Like when they were in such a dominant position back in the quad core days, they should have done discrete GPUs seriously then.
Yes, they absolutely should have. So a bit of a weird one that it took so long to get to there, but I guess they were just focused on processors at that time, making so much money from CPUs and having relatively small integrated graphics in them that they could just focus on that. But I think, Radeon with their APUs did put a bit of pressure on them to increase the graphics capabilities in an APU. And then it sort of flows into, well, we have to make a better graphics architecture. What else can we use this architecture for? We'll get to Arc. But yes, they probably should have started this path a fair way before. QH Freddy asked in our Discord chat for our Patreon members a question for us for the podcast, which is, what do you think of the idea that most of Radeon sales are just people who want not NVIDIA? How much do you think Intel threatens Radeon sales because they have made a viable not NVIDIA product now? So I guess that goes back a little bit to our discussion when we were talking about Radeon and the things that they've sort of done. I guess, first of all, is Radeon the sort of not NVIDIA option? Is that why people are buying Radeon now, or is it more of a value thing?
I think if you spend a lot of time in YouTube comments and on places like Reddit, you get that vibe, let's say. But I don't think that's the situation at all. And it does come back to what we were talking about earlier. And I think the whole discount, how much money you can save, we were talking about that being very important at the entry level. But I think if we look at the current generation GPU stack, I really think the value thing is a big deal all the way up to about the $600 US price point, maybe even a little bit, maybe even as high as 800. But as we've said, once you get to 1,000 and beyond, that's when you sort of start to go, I just want the best. But I think at the $600 price point, and this is sort of what we saw with like a 5700 XT, why that was so successful. I think if they can match or beat GeForce performance at that $600 price point and offer it for, $500, which would be about a 17% discount, or like $480, which would get you to roughly that 20% discount. I think that's where those products would also be as popular as the B580. So I think if you can save a substantial amount of money at that, what would be $600 tier performance, people are still going to go for that. So again, it's about saving the money. And if AMD had have come out, made the RX 7600 $220, let's say, the whole Radeon GeForce thing, it goes out the window. No one's buying an almost no one's buying an RTX 4060. And I know people will be like, oh, bullcrap, the Steam charts would still have the RTX 4060 well ahead of the 7600. But I just don't think that'd be the case. I think everyone doing builds online, if you went to YouTube and you typed in, console killer, those type of videos, budget PC build, entry-level PC build, the best value PC build, I think all of them universally would be recommending the RX 7600. And when you see that, it's just a lot of people buy the RX 7600, but because the RX 7600's less than 10% better value, no one's making those videos. Like, at $270, we were sitting there sort of going, well, which one do you buy? Is it worth saving?
Remember it was going to be $300?
Yeah, that's bad. It's real bad. It's real bad. Well, I remember I had to redo my whole review. It was like 24 hours out. My initial RX 7600 review just slammed the thing as just being a dead on arrival, a pointless release. Why release it at the same price as the GeForce GPU, which has, DLSS, which is a better quality upscaling, especially at 1080p, better quality ray tracing. Not that we put too much weight on that, but it is still a thing. Like, they both have 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so that's not a thing. So in any way you can, basically, in any measurable metric, in any way you can distinguish the two products, it was a win for the GeForce GPU. So that being the case, why would you buy the inferior product for the same price? And then it became a question of, do you buy the slightly inferior product? Because I think it is only slightly inferior at this performance tier. Is it worth saving $30? And again, if you play games like Fortnite, historically those games have run better on GeForce hardware, just better frame time performance, especially after updates. You have to do a bit of tinkering to get the Radeon GPUs working well. I don't know if that's still the case today because I haven't looked into it recently. But you generally just get a slightly better experience with the GeForce GPU, which is why we think there is a price premium associated, or why you can justify a price premium for the GeForce GPU. So again, it needed to be at least $50 US cheaper, which is what the B580 is. I honestly think the RX 7600 is a $220 product at launch. Now it's probably not worth that.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, like, again, we're talking about the DIY market here again. So the 4060 is going to, like, because those steps haven't been taken to get the enthusiasts on board, to start the word of mouth, to start changing things for the pre-built system things. Yes, even if those cards were the price that we were talking about, people were recommending them in YouTube builds or whatever, yes, you'd probably still see on the Steam hardware survey that the 4060 significantly outsells the 7600. And, you know, that's true, especially in regions in Asia where NVIDIA is even stronger than Radeon. It's a little different in like Europe and America, where the market share can be a little different. In Asia, it is extremely strong towards NVIDIA and Intel, and those things take even longer based on things that we've discussed with various OEMs over time. But you got to start somewhere. You got to start getting those recommendations in. And I know people also say, "Oh, we just want AMD or Intel GPUs or whatever to be cheap, so that NVIDIA GPUs will be cheaper." So that's the whole. We need competition just so that NVIDIA makes better products, which I guess is true to some degree because competition will force NVIDIA to make moves. But I don't buy that. That is the only reason we want cheap GPUs. I think people will buy these products if they're priced appropriately. That's how it works with all sorts of markets across many different product categories. There usually is some sort of dominant brand in a lot of areas where, like, vacuum clean, like something as silly as vacuum cleaners, right? Like you've got Dyson, right? Like the Apple of vacuum cleaners that make really expensive, good products most of the time. And then you've got all the other brands. Well, you can't have your no-name, not Dyson brand selling a $2,000 vacuum cleaner because Dyson sells a $2,000 vacuum cleaner that's better. So they sell their products at lower prices. They make them more affordable, better value. This is true across just so many different areas. We don't want to see cheaper vacuum cleaners to make Dyson vacuum cleaners cheaper. We want cheaper vacuum cleaners so then we can buy better products at lower prices. So that would be true for Radeon as well. And I think some of the issues that we've been talking about, which I don't think apply as much to the B580, are things like you can look at the rasterization performance of cards in the $500 range, like a 7800 XT, for example. You look at that and you say, okay, that's pretty good. Like the value is pretty strong for a 7800 XT relative to a 4070 or 4070 Super for rasterization. Looks okay. But then there's all these niggling things in the back of your mind that take you away from doing that purchase. Like, I'm a little bit interested in ray tracing performance. Let's have a look at ray tracing. Oh, what's Radeon doing there? They're not offering value for ray tracing. And then upscaling. Yeah, I might want to use upscaling. What's AMD offering there? Yeah, it's not great. What about video encoding and those sort of features? Yeah, not hearing great things about that. And so they're sort of pricing their products based on one feature, really, the rasterization performance. Whereas I feel like with the Intel B580, if you were interested in ray tracing performance, you look at it and you're like, that's not that bad. Like it's not as good, but it's not disastrously bad. Like it does okay. You think about something like upscaling, you're like, okay, well, XeSS is actually reasonably good. Like the XMX version works as well as DLSS in a lot of games. I think DLSS still has a small edge in some circumstances, but the Intel exclusive version that runs on Arc is genuinely quite good. So you look at that and you're like, okay, XeSS is now in a lot of games. Tick, tick. Ray tracing, not too bad. Price, value, good. VRAM, good. Radeon hasn't done those sort of things to, I guess, eliminate those issues that may make someone sway back towards the GeForce team. They've been focused on this one thing, and one thing isn't the GPU market anymore. Rasterization performance isn't everything. Gamers want value. They want VRAM. They want ray tracing, especially at those higher tier performance. They want things like upscaling to be not bad. That's why, we ask for these discounts in products, and I think that's why even a 7800 XT doesn't sell that well, despite it being, reasonable price to performance for rasterization. So for the future of their products, AMD is going to become more relevant, more important for them to price not just based on the rasterization performance, but the ray tracing performance of their cards. Where does that stack up? Where does the upscaling side of things stack up? And yeah, they just haven't done that.
No, that's right. So I guess I was going to talk a bit more about the Radeon thing, but you know what? I'm not going to. We'll circle back to this in 6 months. We'll see how the B580 sells, how popular it is, how maybe AMD and NVIDIA counter it. But right now it's, we'll see how it plays out, because it'll be quite shocking if the B580 is quite successful, being that it's just their second attempt at it. There's not much support behind the Arc brand right now, but what I hear, initial sales have been way stronger than anyone could have imagined. So we'll see how long that continues for. And yeah, I hope it's a success. I really do, because it's great for PC gaming. I want to see it well supported. And obviously it shifts things more in the direction that we've been wanting to see them shift in for a while now. And yeah, it also just proves that everything we've been saying about Radeon was correct, but that remains to be seen yet. So we can't say we were definitely right just yet, apart from the fact that the Radeon brand hasn't been a success doing what they were doing, which we said wouldn't work. So anyway, we'll wait and see how that plays out. But I really do hope the B580 does well.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too harsh on Radeon with these things, because they are just about to launch new products. So,
well, we're talking about what they've done, though, right? Like the proofs in the pudding.
Yes.
Like the evidence is all there. The RX 7600. Like I just jumped over the Amazon bestsellers GPU list, which not something I really ever look at. I'm looking at the US based one. And, the best sellers, an RTX 3060, then a 4070 Ti, then a 3060, then a 4070 Super, then a 4070 Super, then a 4080 Super. And then you finally get to a Radeon GPU in 7th position, and that's an RX 6600, because it's like the cheapest GPU on the market, basically. And in 8th place is another 6600. To find a 7600, I've just got to search for it again. I can't remember the position. So the 7600 XT is actually selling better, the 16 gigabyte model. That's in 22nd position. And then the first 8 gigabyte 7600 is the 31st bestseller at the moment on Amazon. So, and there are close to a dozen 8 gigabyte 4060s that are ahead of it, like various different models. So probably half a dozen. But do you think that if it was $220, that would be the situation?
No.
I mean, the RX 6600 kind of suggests that it definitely wouldn't be the situation, right? Given that it's in 7th and 8th position, and it's the only Radeon model to occupy the top 20 technically. There is somehow an RX 580 in 17th position, an XFX card. So I don't even know how they're still selling, but I mean that product will never die, let's be honest. But yeah, it's basically there's no RDNA 3 GPUs in the top 20. The first RDNA 3 GPU to turn up is the 7600 XTX in 22nd position. I know this is only a rough guide, but it gives you a rough guide of the sales. I imagine if you sit here for the next 12 hours, you're going to see pretty similar trends. And it's one retailer.
Pretty big retailer.
I think it gives you a pretty clear indication of what's going on there.
I guess where I was coming from is more, I want to give AMD some opportunity to correct this mistake, basically. Right? Like they've made errors with this generation, and I think the previous generations, it it wasn't this level of bad in terms of making mistakes. Like the 5700 XT was priced exactly where it should have been priced. We kind of have to give them, I guess, a mulligan on the RDNA 2, because you couldn't buy them at the right, like whatever prices they were setting, it was all messed up because of
sure,
that sort of thing. I think if those products, if GeForce and Radeon were both at the prices that they would have and should have set them at, and this is not factoring in like the fact that a 6600's MSRP is something like $330 from memory. I'm assuming in a normal market it would not have been priced like that at its MSRP. It would have been lower. They priced it that high because GPUs were, by the time they launched it, GPUs were just so unavailable that, I'm assuming that, we'll give them a pass on that. It's really just this latest generation where I think they've really slipped. Like they didn't capitalize as much as they probably should have with the COVID era, the 6000 series, and then made some mistakes this generation. But they are just about to launch new products, and they've had plenty of learning opportunities throughout this generation. They should have learnt that pricing your products just a little bit lower than NVIDIA doesn't work. They should have learnt that in the mainstream market, based on the B580 launch, there is strong demand for affordable, good products at that price. And you will see reasonable demand and sales and reception if things go well, you price things properly. They should have learnt that VRAM is important in these price classes, because they should have been seeing data for things like 7600 XT, 16 versus 8 gigabyte, 4060 Ti, 16 versus 8 gigabyte, the preference for those high VRAM models. That should be a lesson that's been learnt here. They should be learning things about, more focus on not just rasterization performance, that pure raster isn't the only factor that sells GPUs. They have to make cards compelling in other areas too. So they've got all this data from this generation. If they make the same mistakes again with the next generation, I think we can be very harsh on them, because they will have learned absolutely nothing and made, again, some pretty serious blunders. But there's a learning opportunity here. And we're not expecting them to, middle of a generation, middle of a GPU release cycle, to suddenly completely change everything that they were doing and make drastic changes one way or another. Companies don't generally do that. But with a new generation, everything's on the table to change. And they've certainly been making statements towards thinking more about value and those sorts of things. So whether or not they follow through with that remains to be seen. But this isn't like we're sitting here going, Radeon's dead and it's all over for them. It's like a couple of changes here and there, and Radeon's right back into it. Like
that's the frustrating part. It's a very good product, really.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm pretty keen to see what they do, but certainly for now, and again, we're not expecting probably those sub $300 GPUs to be launched straight away. Intel does have the best value GPU on the market in this price range at the moment, and will probably continue to do so for at least into the first quarter of 2025. They will be in that sort of good position. So I'm really keen to see the sort of sales trends and those sorts of things, see user reception when they start buying them, probably their first Arc GPU that they've used, and see how it goes. But to have this sort of level of interest and excitement around a GPU is good again. It feels good. It feels good to be talking about a product, not just being like, well, that was another disappointment. It's like, there's excitement now. Let's take a break and we'll come back and talk about our boring lives. All right, we're back. Steve, I hear your voice has been a little crackly throughout this episode. How are you doing and what's been happening in your life?
Yeah, apologies to everyone for that. I think, was it yesterday you were interested in doing the podcast, recording it? I can't remember now.
No, I think I always wanted to do it today.
Okay, you were just inquiring it. Yeah, well, yesterday my voice was very bad. And I think I said to you by tomorrow it might be okay. And I mean, we got through it. It wasn't great, but what are you going to do? Yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on. Everyone's been very sick for probably the last 4 weeks on and off. And I've had various symptoms throughout, but I haven't gotten sick. It's just been a bit unoptimized at times. Like sometimes I felt a bit drowsier than I'd like to, or my voice plays up or whatever. Balin had a pretty rough weekend, basically couldn't sleep. So he came in a bit later. Well, he said he was going to come in late today and then he didn't. So I'm like, Matt, I said you could. You can relax. But anyway, so he's struggling a bit with it. The rest of my family's pretty sick, and then extended family's also quite sick, and a lot of people around town and even further away seem to be getting quite sick. So I don't really know what's going on. But yeah, thankfully I've been able to keep working and get things done. And I'm not taking any medication or anything. I'm just hopefully letting the body deal with it naturally. But the whole voice going yesterday was a weird one. I wasn't expecting that, but otherwise I feel pretty good.
Okay. Nice.
Can't really complain. So I'll be jumping into some content the second we got off this. So I've got some interesting content lined up. So that's always good. As far as boring life stuff goes, yeah, I've just been out here surviving, Tim. haven't done too much. The weather's been hot, so I haven't done too much outside. So I haven't really got. I don't think I have too much to report, to be perfectly honest.
Well, you've been in recovery mode and reviewing mode.
So. I've been in recovery mode and reviewing mode. I think last time we were talking about Black Friday sales.
Yes.
And I mentioned that I'd bought myself a drone for my birthday. Did I?
I think you were talking, maybe this was in our live stream for Patreon members, can't quite remember, but you were talking about thinking of getting a drone.
Super short story. One of my daughters is always finding ways for me to spend my money, as kids like to do. And years ago, she was like, Dad, it'd be really cool if we got you a drone. I think you want a drone, don't you, Dad? I'm like, no, not really. She's like, no, you want a drone. Nah. So for the last 2 years, I'm like, I'm definitely not wasting money on a drone. Anyway, this year my wife's like, you should probably get yourself a drone for your birthday. I don't know why she was on board, but I'm like, why is everyone against me on? So anyway, I did a bit of research and I thought it could be fun to get a drone because we could film some cool like garden BTS videos for the members and stuff. And I've sort of always wanted to play around with one. So I bought the DJI Air 3S maybe. Fly More combo, something along those lines. I don't remember the exact model, but that I think that's it. It's an Air 3 something. Anyway, bought that on Black Friday. It was like a small discount, whatever. I had to get this thing, guys. It's 2 years I had to cave. It's like that or a puppy, and I can't be bothered with a dog. So got the drone. They've got 2 cats. That's enough. Bought the drone, set it up, and then Zoe wanted to fly it straight away, of course. So we took it outside. Basically, where I'm going with this is I'm super impressed with how good the drone technology is now and how well they work. And because I just thought, oh man, this thing's going to be a nightmare. Like, we don't really know what we're doing. I'm not that interested in it. It's just going to cost me a fortune in broken stuff, if not entire drones. But I'm like, whatever. We've got one, and I wouldn't mind getting some because I've got quite a big property. I thought it'd be cool to get some, video and photo of the whole property because the camera on it's phenomenally good, by the way. Like, crazy how good quality it is. Anywho, things are amazing. Like, idiot proof, as far as I can tell. I shouldn't say that, but we've used it for quite a few, I would say, hours now, and no dramas. So, yeah, I mean, you can't really go wrong with it. It's like, your car, when you're reversing your car and you've got you probably don't know, but modern cars, Tim, have sensors and they beep when you get close to things, and it sort of does all that sort of stuff because I've got a lot of trees, and Zoe, who's 11, is, within minutes was able to fly this thing very well. She was going down through the trees and stuff, and yeah, it's really cool. And you can go very far. It's got like a 20K range. And because we've got heaps of farmland behind us, she sent it quite far. You couldn't see it anymore, so she's just looking down at the screen, controlling it that. And then you can just tell it to return home, maps out the best flight path to come home. It tells you, like, it'll be landing in like 1 minute and 43 seconds. And it lands where it took off from. It checks the landing zone before it lands. And
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it all works well. We haven't been able to trip it up or stuff it up. We did a night fly with the light on underneath it. At max altitude, it looks like a star. Like, it's pretty bright. And again, it all worked flawlessly at night. It was able to return home, land on our deck. It's got to navigate, like, not hitting a roof and stuff. So, yeah, it's about probably a 3 meter by 3 meter area with quite a few obstacles. And of course, there's trees everywhere and no dramas so far. Very cool. And yeah, the second day we had it, it was blowing. The gum trees were just about on their side. There was crap going everywhere. And so I was like, Dad, I really want to fly the drone. And I'm like, well, I don't know. We'll see if it takes off and what warnings it gives us. So did the initial takeoff. it was fine. Camera looked good. She flew off, and stuff's like it was blowing, and it's just smooth as like the shots it was getting were really cool. You can see like the birds were like darting out of the trees, and they were struggling in the wind, and the drone's just like getting perfect shots of them. No wobble on the camera, nothing. When she went to max altitude, she got a wind warning, but it was still fine up there, no dramas. So she got some cool shots up there, came down, and yeah, it's actually been a lot of fun. I was like, it was a lot of money, but having seen what it can do and how well it works, I'm like, kind of, if I knew this, I would have bought one, I guess, which is probably a good advertisement for something. When you've potentially wasted all the money and you're like, kind of regret buying this. I don't know if we're ever going to use it, but it's just a cool tool to have. You can do some cool stuff with it. So yeah, very impressed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember using some drones ages ago. Like this would have been probably almost 10 years ago now, like early drone stuff. And they're always like just a little difficult to use. And, the signal, wasn't great, especially the early streaming stuff where they just tried to stream it to your phone or whatever. And you just crash it all the time. And I was like, okay, like this is kind of, it is what it is. Like I'm not over, like I don't really need this in my life. Like I probably won't use this sort of drone too much. But yeah, like it's cool how the technology's come so far. And I've heard a lot about sort of your experiences with other people as well. Like the quality of the cameras has just gone through the roof. Like it's not like just they've strapped a smartphone camera onto the front of the drone. Like it's really high quality footage and just so easy to use, and the range is incredible and those sorts of things. So yeah, they've come a long way, certainly. And yeah, what you can get for, I'm sure that you still spent a reasonable amount of money, but you're not talking like high-end cinema gear type of money. There's still
it was like $2,200 or something on Black Friday, which it's not an insignificant amount of money. It's not nothing,
but for camera gear, that's not expensive.
No, but honestly, for what you get, and what I've seen so far, it's a bargain. Like it's really cool, works really well. Even the latency and stuff, we went a couple of kilometers out and instant response, the camera feed, it works so well. I can't believe it.
Yeah. So very, very impressive, those sorts of things these days. So yeah, it's cool that you've had that sort of experience. What I've been doing out this way recently is, I installed some drip line irrigation into my orchard. So that has worked very well. Really happy with those sorts of results. I think I talked about this in the podcast a couple of weeks ago that I was going to do it. Well, I actually went and did it. So
nice. Well, you need it today.
Yes, I need it today. I needed it yesterday as well. Quite warm. Really just very simple, straightforward, just works really well. So just using some pretty standard drip line stuff that you can get from Bunnings and regular polypipe, all hooked it up. And eventually I'll hook it in with some, more automation type things to turn on and off the water. At the moment, it's just plug in a hose, turn it on, run it for about 30 minutes, turn it off sort of thing. Eventually I'll put it probably more like what I've got for my veggie garden, where it's, I've got a automated timer and things like that on there. But yeah, I was just, with all those sorts of things, it's always like, you put it together. Is this going to work and leak and explode or that sort of thing? And is it going to clog up the little holes that are on it with dirt and whatnot? But it just seems to work well. So, and not too expensive to install and much more effective than because I used to have in my orchard area where I've got all my fruit trees, there's just like green flat things with holes in it, whatever you call those. They're kind of like a soaker hose.
Yeah.
So, the flat transparent ones where they just spray everywhere out of them, and you get sort of a nice even coverage wherever you put them in a line. Like those were effective and worked, but they've just one summer, at least whatever ones I bought, have just fully degraded. Like they were just, you could snap them in half in your hands sort of thing.
Yeah, they
like
perish.
No durability whatsoever.
I'll be interested to hear how long your drip lines work for, because they will eventually sort of go the same way, but I think they'll last a lot longer. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think so. I think the polypipe, the standard stuff will be a bit more durable, because basically I've got in my orchard, I've put like a long distribution line, because my orchard is basically 2 rows in a long line. So I've put like a distribution line that's just normal polypipe, and then coming out of that is sort of extenders that go into the drip line, which I've just coiled around the base of the trees.
Right. Okay.
At the drip line of the tree. So they're sort of, the smaller trees is just a single loop. The larger trees, it's more of a spiral that goes around the base to get, good coverage under the canopy of the tree.
So that's easily replaceable. Like the polypipe will be there for 1,000 years, basically.
Yeah. So,
so you
I just could cut off the the connectors or pull it out of the connectors, replace the tube, and then eventually I'll put some mulch over the top of that. So the polypipe, the drip line itself is buried under the mulch to, have it all optimal. At the moment, it's just sort of exposed a little bit. But yeah, like hopefully, I think one season of use out of a soaker hose is not good. Like they probably should be built to last a bit longer than that. Maybe I could have taken it in or something like that, but I think it was mostly just the sun of one summer sort of cooked it a little bit and just made it brittle and useless. But yeah, hopefully this will be more effective. And also because it's drip line, it doesn't use as much water. It's a bit better of its effectiveness for watering and that sort of thing. Doesn't spray out water everywhere. But yeah, it was easy to put together, very simple. All the connectors are available at Bunnings, which is our local large hardware store.
It's like Lowe's.
Yeah, exactly. No issues. Had one leak, just replaced that connector with I guess might have had a small defect in it or something. So no leaks really, working super well. So I've been very happy with that, and it's going to make this summer of keeping my trees alive a bit easier because it's been pretty dry this year. Haven't had as much. I think I'm only going to get about 70% of our average annual rainfall this year throughout the year. So, we're needing to use tanks for a few more things. So, yeah, that's worked well. And then also I've been playing Indiana Jones and I think it's called Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the new Indiana Jones game that's just come out. I haven't gotten too far into it, but I've been really enjoying it so far. I've sort of played a little bit of it for the recent ray tracing noise video where I talked about it in there a little bit. But I've been really enjoying it. So very fun sort of game, first person. It's more of a stealth adventure sort of game. Like you're just going around finding secrets, the occasional punching of Nazis in Italy, because I think it's set in like 1930 something. Lots of whip action and climbing. Because the developer Machine Games has made the Wolfenstein games, the previous couple of those, which were very much just run, gun, shooting things, very fast-paced sort of first-person shooter type thing. This is a little different. I was expecting it to be more of the combat side of things, which isn't very strong in the game. You just beat people up with... You can basically pick up any item and beat people up with it, which is kind of fun. But yeah, the fact that it's a lot more stealth exploration, seeing cool things... multiple different pathways. It seems like it's quite a well-made game. And I've been playing it with the full-blown path tracing enabled. I've been reasonably impressed with the performance of how, because path tracing is usually you turn it on and your frame rate is just awful. It's probably the best performing path traced implementation yet in terms of, it's still quite playable. I'm using a 4090, of course, but on that card, it seems to be quite playable. That said, there are a few issues with compatibility, a few things in the game. HDR and frame generation doesn't work together for some reason. Not sure why, probably needs a patch. There's a few little things like that have, maybe a little fresh out of the oven on the game, but yeah, runs well if you're not using it actually runs really well if you're not running the path tracing mode. It's a fully ray traced game, looks great. And yeah, the gameplay is very enjoyable. I haven't explained it very well because I'm not a game reviewer, so probably just go watch like the Skill Up review or one of those reviews that will tell you everything about how the game works in the gameplay. But I enjoy watching the Indiana Jones movies, and it feels like playing a game that's an Indiana Jones movie, which is enjoyable. So yeah, kind of a cool sort of game. And once I've finished it, I'll give my full thoughts on it. But yeah, it's been fun. So when I'm not outside doing things in the garden, that's what I've been doing. That's the two things in my life at the moment.
Nice.
All right. That'll do it for this podcast episode. We'll save Steve's voice for making some Hardware Unboxed main channel content in the next couple of days. So yes, the usual sort of things at the end of this episode. If you want to get the video version, it's up on the Hardware Unboxed podcast YouTube channel. For whatever reason, you just want to see our faces, we're up on there. We've also got the audio feed, which is pretty much the same thing as the video feed, but without the shock and horror of having to see us throughout an hour and a half recording. So that's also available in all your various different feeds. So yeah, thanks for listening to this episode. Probably won't have too many more episodes throughout the end of this year with all the end of year Christmas sort of things. We'll try squeeze maybe one more in, and then we'll be back with releases and stuff in early January. Should be a very, very busy 2025 at the start of the year from what we're hearing. All sorts of things launching, so get hyped for that. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.